Hello and welcome to today's webcast, Key Considerations for Hybrid Cloud Environments, brought to you by Insight Cloud and Data Center Transformation and Google. I'm Rachel Mason, Marketing Manager at Insight, and will be your moderator today. Before we begin, I wanted to cover a few housekeeping items. This webcast is designed to be interactive between you and the presenters. The webcast console you are looking at can be completely customized. You can resize or move any of the windows that you've opened. If you have any questions during the webcast, you can click on the Q&A widget at the bottom and submit your question. All questions from this webcast will be captured, and there will be a Q&A during the last 10 minutes of the presentation. If you are experiencing any technical difficulties, please visit the webcast help guide by clicking on the question mark icon below the presentation window. The help guide covers common technical issues. I would now like to introduce you to our speakers today from Insight. On the phone with me, we have Juan Orlandini, our Chief Architect, Sri Vasudevan, our Senior Cloud Principal, and Levi Gibson, our Senior Product Manager. I would now like to turn this presentation over to our speaker, Juan. Juan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Appreciate you joining us today. So today, before I get started, I'd just like to give a brief recap of what we're going to cover. We're going to go over what are some of the best practices and design patterns for building hybrid cloud environments, and in particular, we're going to focus on how to do that around GCP and the suite of products and offerings that are available on that platform. So speaking of which, let's get into some of the design steps that you need to take. First and foremost is you really need to take a look at the portfolio and decision logic for how do you go about doing a transformation. So you got to understand what your adoption strategy is of hybrid structures, on-premises structures, and on public structures. You absolutely have to do an application rationalization. A hybrid model, a public model, or a on-premises model is not a perfect fit for every application. In fact, there's some that belong in one versus the other, and you have to do that. It's the old adage of you got to measure twice and cut once. And it might even be a measure 3 or 4 times and then cut once, because there's a lot of expense associated with making any of these decisions if you don't do them very carefully. Then there's a big decision around whether you should be buying commodity off-the-shelf products and consuming those by optimizing them for your environment, renting them as a software as a service, and then again optimizing them, or building your own application, so right from scratch. And that's where you have your developers consuming some of these services. And there's a lot that goes into that, and we'll explore a little bit more of that down the road. Once you have all of these base elements figured out, you also have to understand what your platform and architecture is going to be for your hybrid infrastructure. So you have to have an applications platform, something that runs the application itself. You might have to do some legacy modernization on your on-premises or even in your code base potentially. And that modernization can be as simple as maybe upgrade my storage, upgrade my data protection, whatever it is. But it could be much more involved as if it's the code base itself. You might also have to do some cloud native patterns. The public cloud and the hybrid clouds tend to work much better if you develop and consume them in cloud native ways. And there's 2 ways to think about cloud native. There's the capital cloud native, that's the mentalities, for lack of better terms. And then there's a lowercase cloud native, which is where it actually runs. And you actually have to think about it in both senses. So if you're not familiar, please go to cncf.org, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, and that'll give you the capital cloud native. That's the way of thinking about this stuff. How do you build these things? And then the lowercase is where you actually run it, and we'll talk about that. In application modernization, we're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about that, and that's where you might actually have to rewrite, refactor, there's a lot of R's that are associated with that. And in fact, Sri, why don't you take us to another slightly deeper look into this and take us into the next slide after that.
Yeah, thanks, Juan. So as you're considering the transformation strategies and trying to adopt a hybrid model or a public cloud model, whichever the right strategy would be, you go through typically a few steps in detail. So the first thing you have to do is obviously evaluate your best cloud approach? Do you want to completely go to a public cloud model? Do you have existing technical debt, or you need to leverage investments that continue to flourish in your private cloud or colo or your own on-prem data centers, and then decide if you have to go towards a hybrid model. So you have to create your evaluation process for the best cloud approach for your applications and your requirements. And then as you go through that process, you have to think about and decide a cloud deployment model as well. So do you have applications that fit the infrastructure as service model? Do you need to enable your developers towards a more PaaS model? Or do you have applications that can be retired on your on-prem and you can go to a SaaS model, which may be the best possible path for some of the applications? And then as you go through that process, you also have to do readiness assessments to understand and make sure that your applications are located in the right place, they're right fit for the model that you chose. You have to do an economic assessment, so you are not going to be overpaying for your assets and in whichever location you found your workloads to be a best fit for. And then you have to round it out with your operational model and what needs to change so that you can manage and operate efficiently wherever the workloads reside. And finally, you have to have an understanding of your governance, security, et cetera. So as you go through all of that, you do the rationalization, you understand your application strategies, you create a profile for your applications in terms of who's the owner, who's the user, what are the SLAs for those applications, things like RTO, RPOs. You try to map your resource and capacity needs. You have to document if you have vendor support, are they going to support your transformation needs? What is the support structure? How do you need to change that? The cost to run your workload in the right place, and is that the right decision? And finally, you have to look at any challenges or difficulties in remediation that you may have to undertake before creating a migration strategy. So you need to make sure that you have all the technical drivers, the business drivers, the application requirements, and you have documented why are you doing any of these things, whether it's an application platform modernization or you have legacy applications that need to move somewhere else so you can continue to run them efficiently. And we'll talk about a little bit of that in a methodology process. And finally, your goals in terms of modern application architectures or platforms, et cetera. So one last thing to talk about that is when you think about application modernization and you go through a process of identifying cloud native patterns, or whether you have a process to accelerate your cloud native adoption in terms of your legacy apps, or you have applications that are vendor supported or COTS that simply you're not able to upgrade or you don't have the source code for, you can create your process in terms of your requirements or your objectives, whether you're trying to improve your application architecture. So you may have monolithic applications right now, you want to go towards a microservices or n-tier, or you have a process that you currently use, whether it's agile or not, or you're trying to move towards a more DevOps model. And then finally, you have to marry the two and then say, what is the application infrastructure that I need, which we talked about, whether it's private, public, hosted, on-prem, and you have to go through that end to end. We'll move on to the next slide. And this describes a process and a methodology that you have to go through. So you obviously have to have your business requirements. We talked about that a little bit in terms of your technical requirements, your application requirement, your business processes. Can you change the business process to write new applications? Do you need to change your applications to conform to new business processes? Do you just need to change your existing application infrastructure to more modern? So you go through that process flow through not only documenting your requirements, your transformation objectives, and then you go through a detailed discovery process. So you're documenting your application portfolio, you're documenting your ownership, SLAs, application profiling that I talked about a little while ago. You understand your application rationalization matrix. So are you able to rehost existing applications? Do you have to retain, or can you retire some of your applications so your application portfolio is streamlined? Can you replace them with, SaaS or COTS, as I mentioned, as part of your cloud strategies? And then once you have decided all of that, then you can figure out your criteria and your migration strategy. So you can do a process to understand if your applications are a fit for a cloud. So you can create a cloud index to say the X workload is good for a public cloud based on several criteria, including performance, availability, and governance, security, et cetera. And then you go through that process. So typically the process will go through, you look at your application, see what you have to retain and what you can retire. Then you understand if your applications are candidates for SaaS or COTS, so you can replace them with those. And then you go down that list, and then you find out your applications that are candidates for rehost. You can simply move them to your cloud provider like GCP, and then you rehost them through a process or re-platform them. In some cases, you may want to right-size your infrastructure that supports your application. So you can tweak the rehost method a little bit and go through a right-sizing exercise so you architect your environment in the right way. Juan, would you like to add something to that?
Yeah, thanks, Sri. One of the things that that's called out, but not explicitly on this slide, is that there's a dependency mapping that we need to consider as part of this as well. So this is on a per application view that's really talking about it, right? And there's a dependency map that might drive a lot of the decision matrix on this. Well, who's talking to whom, who depends on what? And that's partly a business dependency mapping as well as a technology dependency mapping. So when Sri's talking about the retain or re-platform, we're really talking about in the context of a dependency. Nothing in our IT environments lives in isolation. Everything talks to something else, right? And it's really important that as you go through these transformation methodologies on the left, that roadmap captures those business requirements, which are in that requirements and constraints box. But that you also consider in there, hey, if I'm going to retain it and you're keeping it on premises, that I am modernizing what I'm retaining. So I touched on it briefly. I might need to just upgrade my compute or my storage or my network or a combination of all of those things. And then that really becomes an enabler for you to do the final transformation down the road after the sequencing and the dependency maps have been, constraints have been met. So hopefully that puts it in a little bit slightly different context. It's the same view, but a slightly different context. Back over to you, Sri.
Yeah, so all the things that Juan you just mentioned, they're part of that discovery process, right? So the discoveries go through multiple stages where you not only get your current state and baseline infrastructure assessments, you understand your resource capacity requirements. Also, you're going through that process to make sure that your workloads are, fit for any type of cloud or cloud delivery models. And then you do the application profiling, which I talked about, and Juan added to the dependency mapping, which is, sometimes you not only need to understand it in terms of your migration efforts or your application portfolio strategy, but even when you're doing cloud native patterns, some of those dependency mappings point out what are cloud anti-patterns. So specifically, if you have monolithic applications or applications that evolve over a period of time, they tend to create a more static data dependence, if you will, and those kind of things are anti-patterns as you go towards a more cloud native pattern. So dependency mapping is crucial in many ways, so you understand them right up before your transformation strategies. And then you round out your...
So on that dependency mapping thing, I'd like to just point out one quick thing too. It's really easy to get lost in the dependency mapping by doing a traffic flow analysis. And in fact, some of our partners and some other folks in the industry, there's actually many that say, hey, I got a tool that will discover all of your dependency mappings. And that's what they're doing, is they're looking at network flows or communication links or one of those kinds of things. And that is absolutely critical and important, but it's not the whole picture. It's really important that as you do the application dependency mappings, you're doing these business level evaluations, that you have a conversation with the stakeholders, the application owners of the line of businesses, because that is the only way that you actually determine the value of a workload. And it might be that the value of a workload either moves it up in the migration strategy, or actually pushes it down because of risk or because of lack of importance or whatever it is down the value chain. So it's really, really important that as you start looking through these things, is that you marry both of those. You got to understand what's talking to who depends on whom from a traffic flow analysis, but also at a business level, because it might be that there's this one little thing that's really tiny that is only communicating every now and then to the rest of the business, but that thing happens to be what drives your entire business. And understanding how that thing is built, run, and where it runs is going to be critical to everything. So just keep that in mind as you go through this. Sorry, Sri, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for that. So just to kind of summarize the process, you do the discovery, understand your criteria as you evaluate your criteria against what you discovered and your future states, and you create your migration strategies or transformation strategies as needed, application by application basis. And then, you look at your application, perhaps your intent is to just move them to a modern infrastructure, perhaps containerize them, or you need to move, in a similar fashion, but to a more optimal cloud scenario like GCP, or you're looking at more modern methodologies and implement DevOps and CI/CD and infrastructure as code, which you can also combine and do with other steps. Or perhaps you just want to absolutely re-architect and rebuild some of your core applications into more modern microservices, and you have to create a whole strategy around peeling off from your monolithic apps into microservices frameworks, along with the other modern methodologies and containerization. So it takes a lot of effort and a sequence, and understanding your requirements, goals, objectives, documenting your current state, clearly mapping it out. And then finally, you have to understand whatever your future transformation state is and architecture is, you need to make sure that the cost to run is understood, the economics of that model is understood, and what are the best possible avenues available as you negotiate with your cloud provider. With that note, I'll hand to Levi, who can talk to us a little bit about those concerns and challenges and options.
Awesome. Thanks, Sri, and thank you, Juan. So for those on the call, my name is Levi Gibson, and I'm part of our product management division here at Insight for the cloud platform providers. So the organization I sit in really looks at the cloud platform vendors from a neutral perspective, and really tries to figure out what is the best strategy and ongoing approach for customers to adopt these platforms in the market. And what Juan and Sri really covered on the past couple slides is thinking about your cloud migrations or your hybrid cloud strategy from the stance of determining your business requirements, really defining your transformational method, and then taking the steps into that journey. If you've been in cloud for the past couple of years, you're familiar with some of these steps as far as deciding retire, rehost, replace. What I want to talk a little bit about is, two other sides of this that we really start to see success with, and that's, adopting an iterative approach as well as working on what I call the soft side of cloud. So when we think about, these steps of migrations, when you consider the steps in your journey and your workload and transformational method, you should not consider that a point in time that you complete and move forward from. Where we're seeing IT organizations struggle is around the IT professionals who take those considerations, define their transformational method, move into their journey steps, and then from there start to move on with migrations in sequence, so kind of one after the other. And where we see this happening a lot is really in organizations where there's, a CEO or board mandate to move to cloud, or with organizations that have a large cloud commit and just need to start going into fast progressions of migrations. And what we see in those is we don't really get ideal states with the clients. Costs start to sprawl, as well as the advantages of actually moving to cloud just becomes, the only benefit they're reaping is really that it's another location that's out of the data center, and you're not getting your full capabilities that these cloud platform vendors provide. Where we see organizations that are really successful for it, have their IT professionals who are managing the cloud environment looking at this transformational method in iteration. So every time they look at a workload, and do that dependency mapping and talk to the business units that are managing that workload, as Juan mentioned earlier, but they're doing that in sequence. So they may do that once, do a migration, do that again, do another migration. And so you're constantly having that conversation and looking in. And this comes into play a lot for not only capabilities, but making sure you're taking advantage of everything that comes into play, but it starts to sprawl into other benefits for you and your IT department when it comes to technical skill sets and governance management. So what it means to really be iterative and develop that soft side of the skill sets in cloud as you're doing these migrations is keeping a discussion open of, what are you doing to partner with your cloud platform vendor, or if you're using ISV workloads, partner with them to have ongoing technical support around consolidated workloads. How are you starting to adjust your technical skill sets around people and processes? So it's getting very complex. What we're hearing from IT managers is that there's complexity now in, keeping and developing and maintaining skill sets across not only hybrid cloud, but if you're adopting multi-cloud, it becomes even more complex. And then what some of the governance strategies are for these workloads. So if you're just working through migrations in a repetitive nature, we see governance start to sprawl and get a little out of control. So as you take steps and migrate, having that conversation around governance and what that means for operations, what that means for access management, how we allocate costs back to the right business units. Before, when we were in an on-premise world, it was easy. If marketing wanted to do a big project, you bought something and allocated costs to them. You can still have capabilities like that in cloud, but you have to set it up intentionally around that. And then ongoing, cost support and optimization, so that as you're moving new workloads in, you're still looking at your full picture of your hybrid cloud environment and just constantly optimizing and rebudgeting and adjusting in real time, both the workloads you're moving in, but what you've previously moved in, to make sure you're harnessing that cost. And then I mentioned it before, but a big part of this is your partnership with your cloud platform vendor and the other partners you have, like Insight. So anytime you're driving into a cloud platform, one example that we're doing really successfully with Google is as we move clients in, we have a partnership with the Google resource with our technical professionals here at Insight and the client directly, where we meet on a recurring cadence, whether that's weekly or monthly, and chat about your cloud environment and what you have in there that could be optimized, what you're thinking about moving in next. So we can help you with that strategy of what makes sense, whether it's from that assessment and technical workload dependency side, or if it's a soft side of how you're going to manage technical support, how you're going to manage your people process things around it. But pulling all that together, that's kind of what I refer to as the soft side of cloud, and it's just as important as everything else. So Sri, do you want to add anything when it comes to, these migration approaches?
Yeah. So, once you've decided your strategies in terms of which applications are going to use which strategy, there's a few clear paths to move your workloads. Obviously, the first consideration is to find all the applications and the underlying infrastructure that can simply move to, say, a GCP. And it's a simple lift and shift VM migration. So there are tools within the GCP cloud environment to simplify that process. You can move it from your on-prem VMware environments. You can move it from any other cloud if you have to. And the process, the migration methodology is based upon, like we just discussed, we do the discovery, we do a dependency map, we group applications that need to go together, and then you create your replication process and policy so that a bunch of servers that are interdependent and applications that are interdependent can move together or fail back together if there's any issues. Along with that, you do the economic assessment to know what your ongoing costs will be post-migration. The process is very seamless. It's agentless. There's very minimal downtime just during the cutover. You can roll back, like I said, in groups as needed. There's a factory approach, and then you have to go through certain security needs, et cetera. So you create a whole process, and you can move, your entire VM farm if needed using this method. In a variation of that, sometimes, and I talked about it a couple of minutes ago, sometimes you may want to, right-size your environment, especially if you've identified from a performance management perspective, some of your current state configurations are not optimal, and you are not set up for the appropriate amount of resource capacity usage. As you move to the cloud, obviously you're going to be billed for currently configured as well as currently used. So you may want to right-size it. In which case, the lift and shift like for like may not work, but a similar process, especially if you can deploy your binaries to the cloud environment, you can architect the right-size environment and use other methods to deploy those apps, including a pipeline process, so you can do it in a volume manner. So that's the lift and shift migration.
Well, one more thing to consider in here, Sri, if I may. There's a somewhat technical consideration in this. It is technical as to whether to lift and shift to a GCP native container or VMware. A GCP native virtualization engine, like an instance that's native to GCP, or to leverage the newly available VMware on GCP as well. All right, that might actually make some of this a little bit easier from some contexts, but in other contexts might actually be just kicking the can down the street, right? So there's a huge amount of value from an operational perspective that if a client's operations team is more familiar with a VMware environment than they are with GCP themselves, is that you consume the VMware side of the house within GCP to offload the cost of the infrastructure, have it be run on the public cloud, maybe be a part of your DR strategy, or maybe be a wholesale migration to the cloud, but under a VMware set of constructs. And operationally, that might make a lot more sense. And then over time, you transform those either to a cloud native pattern, so containerized, or to a lowercase cloud native to a GCP instance, or it might be that operationally it remains a VMware construct moving forward, just happens to be running on the Google Cloud itself. So that's another consideration. It's a little bit of a different twist, but it is still under the lift and shift VM migration construct. So go ahead, Sri.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think that in some cases, and some of our clients also see the benefit of that in a DR scenario, since it's easier to execute a DR right away and until you really transform your app or your infrastructure. So disaster recovery scenarios are also useful, not just for migration. So just like VMs, moving on, there's in some cases, we talked about a couple of use cases. We can move like for like, we can right size, but still move them into VMs. But in a lot of situations, especially around modernizing your platforms, while not, materially changing your applications, or in just cases where you want to, we have decided that you want to go to a cloud native application pattern, but the journey is long, so you want to accelerate that journey. There's another option with GCP. You can migrate your existing workloads into Anthos, especially if you have a hybrid strategy with applications on-prem as well as in the cloud. This could be a useful strategy. One, do you want to give a little bit of an overview about the challenges, priorities, and requirements that drive this kind of a thinking?
And thank you. So yeah, absolutely. So migrating to Anthos and the GKE engine it does require a rethinking of your development and operational plans. Right? It's the whole DevOps thing, the cloud native in the capital sense of the word. It is a requirement. You should not think of Anthos and or GKE as your next virtual machine infrastructure. That's not what it's built for. It is not designed to be run that way. It's really designed to give you on-premises similar capabilities to what you have on the Google Cloud itself. But it comes with similar requirements from a technical development and operational perspective as well. Where you might want to start considering Anthos is if you have latency problems, or you have applications that are, for whether they're real or not, regulatory requirements required to stay on premises or within a certain geography. That might be the right place for you to go and build and run that application, leveraging the Google services, which make your production teams and development teams more effective, but doing it on premises. And that's the right way to kind of frame where this really fit into my environment. And the migration to it might actually be a migration from a different containerized platform. So you might have started the cloud native journey with open source tools and downloaded it Kubernetes directly from the GitHub site and built your message buses and the persistence layers and all of that stuff just from open source stuff. And now what you want is a much more polished engine that gives you a control plane that's well understood, that's scalable to a hybrid model as well, and gives you flexibility as to where you make that decision moving forward. So that's the right way to think about it. It's not a tools-based thing. You shouldn't be thinking of this, hey, I got this VMware thing over here and I want to just run it on Anthos. That's probably not going to work very well. All right, you might make it work, but it's probably not going to work as well as if you're looking at it from a containerized cloud native thing and you develop for it, or you're migrating something that's similar to that into this, and then using that as an extension from your capabilities you're getting from Google. So hopefully that frames it a little bit better. So back over to you, Sri.
Yeah, so when from the other perspective, when you start looking at your application and your application modernization goals, typically you think about a couple of or three types of these applications or needs. So you might want to transform these apps using modern frameworks, perhaps Java apps or similar. And then you have perhaps commercial off-the-shelf package software that you don't have the source code for, or similarly, you may be running your package software on legacy infrastructure that you don't have the ability or the benefit of upgrading since you're vendor supported, things like those. And you have traditional applications, right? So which may not be candidates for containerization at this stage. So typically you go through a process, you identify these applications, figure out if you're going to modernize some of these applications into modern frameworks, then you containerize them. You can create your deployment processes using modern CI/CD, get to Anthos, and then finally continue your journey towards pure cloud native with refactor and re-architecting your applications. Or in the cases of packaged application that I mentioned, you simply could containerize them with this process to get some benefits. The benefits being better operational ability. You're patching and you're updating your VMs, or not having to manage physical servers or image management, desired state, your configuration management to prevent configuration drift, better role-based access control, improved logging, continuous logging and monitoring, those kind of things. So you can benefit from those things by just moving to such a platform. But you have to go through a process to identify the workloads that you want to migrate that will be candidates for this, and that are not candidates for VM migration or like for like, or even moving to another VM environment in GCP. And then if you identify applications and you have your objectives set out, then you can use this process of migrating to Anthos, which will then dissect your VM content and generate image and data components that you can review and test, and then you can move it to that platform. And then finally, once you're there, you can improve your operations management with things that I mentioned, like CI/CD, deployment processes, policies to deploy them, running them on pods, auto scaling groups, those kind of modern operational methods that your legacy application will definitely benefit from. And then finally, once you are in this platform, you can now continue on your path towards cloud native and performance management, service management, those kind of concepts. Anything else to add, Juan?
No, this is good. Why don't we move on to the next slide where we talk about the persistence layers. And typically that's a database model. So when you're doing migrations to public cloud, you do want to take a consideration for, hey, am I going to be running this in my typical code base with the same database applications that I've been running before? Or do I want to migrate over to a new database type? And it could be a SQL-based type. It could be a NoSQL-based type. And all of those are available on GCP. So it becomes very much a matter of, do I need to do a like-for-like migration? Or can I do some refactoring or one of those kinds of things? And don't forget that as part of this, you do have to consider the DR strategy that comes with it. If you do refactor, it's really important that you, as part of that, maybe build it around a cloud native pattern where the DR part of it is built into the application. If you don't have the opportunity to rebuild it in that way, then start looking at some of the cloud native patterns, and that's the lowercase cloud native, of having the database be hosted in multiple geographies or in multiple redundancies, or there's lots of different aspects to that stuff. But this is all possible. You can, if you measure it and cut once, measure twice, cut once, you can very easily do this seamlessly. Or with minimal downtime for your application and your end users. But there's some practical help that Sri and the team he works under can give you that. So do you want to comment on that, Sri?
Yeah, so the process of migrating existing databases consists of a couple of things. One, like Juan said, you may want to transform and refactor your databases, completely change your platform if you need to, or you can just move an existing platform into GCP. So you can use native tools for replication and transformation, or you can use certain new types of migration methodologies where there's streams of data that can be moved from one place to the other, any source, any target, and in real time. So it's continuous. The change data has been captured in a continuous manner. It's high-speed in-flight stream processing, and sometimes you can even do inline transformation. So you can combine moving your database itself, but you can also transform your application to, say, SQL Server to MySQL as an example. And so there are tools like that. You have to go through your analysis and understand your objectives again for the applications. Perhaps you're looking to modernize your database platforms and how you access your data and data streaming, et cetera. Whatever the use case may be, there's a process that you can use to migrate your databases. Moving on, so obviously, so Juan, would you like to add something to that?
No, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, go ahead, Sri, and let's move on to the hybrid cloud connectivity and talk about how networking, which is important, right? You can't have a data center, regardless whether it's in the cloud or on premises, without networking, and the connectivity that provides you is hugely important. But there's some very key considerations on that side as well. So go ahead, Sri.
Yeah. So especially in a hybrid environment where you have applications living in your data center, you have applications that you have moved or are moving to the cloud, there's a couple of things that are very critical to understand. One is, how are you going to provide physical connectivity between your private cloud, on-prem, off-prem application infrastructure, and then on the cloud? So there's several options that are available. You could do direct peering with Google. Google has, their data centers. They have edge points of presence. They call POPs. They have edge nodes. So you have to go through a process and understanding of, obviously there's a cost consideration as well, but your application needs to either do a direct peering, or you can just use, over VPN type of solutions. But whatever the case may be, you have to first document what your needs are, and then you understand what Google's offerings are. So, do you need to, for example, extend the reach of your data center to the cloud? If that's yes, then you go through a flowchart kind of asking questions whether that needs to be encrypted for the application. If it's not, then you can use it, just a cloud VPN type solution. Or then if you need peering and higher availability and performance, then you can figure out, can you meet Google at one of the POPs like I mentioned. If that's going to be more than, in terms of bandwidth and throughput, are you needing 10 gigs or more? So those kind of questions, and then you can figure out if you can do a dedicated interconnect or you can do a partner interconnect. There's a couple of options to go with GCP. Or, like I said, you can go direct peering or carrier peering depending on your needs if you're running, more than one or using more than one Google services. The second part of that equation is, understanding topologies. So there's a few ways you can interconnect with GCP. The typical one would be mirrored, where your on-prem or private cloud pattern is mirrored to your Google cloud, in which scenario you probably could be running development and staging and testing workloads in Google, perhaps. You're modeling some things, you're running test workloads before you go production on your on-prem. But in that case, you have to consider, things like not allowing Google workloads to talk to your on-prem directly, but at the same time, your, maybe your CI/CD or deployment processes has to work across the platforms. Your monitoring has to work across the platform. Your tooling has to work across the platform. So there's communication requirements. And if you're running Kubernetes workloads, then you have to have a different strategy. You don't need to, peer VPCs, but you have a control plane in public. You can use other strategies to do RBAC to ensure, only specifically allowed people are permitted to perform those deployments. So that's one topology use case. Then you may have a need for, a meshed topology, which you connect your computing environments in a way that workloads can communicate to one another across the boundaries. You have to allow and segment your UDP TCP communications. So in that case, you have to have firewalls and firewall placements and segmentation strategies. You obviously have to restrict traffic flow in a more fine-grained fashion, between and within your environments, whether it's GCP, on-prem, et cetera. Then you can consider a gated ingress or egress, where it could be one directional. You can, gate your ingress from, say, on-prem to Google, or you can gate it from Google to on-prem. But there's some communication that's allowed, which is typically using an API manager or an API gateway. So APIs are exposed. Workloads will leverage the APIs in how they use it. And finally, you can also consider doing this in a bidirectional manner. But the idea is the same. You still have to expose selected APIs through the API gateway, and then you have to make that accessible. This goes obviously hand in hand with identity and access and RBAC, role-based access control, and things like those. But the idea is that, either you allow communication from Google Cloud to your private computing, either you don't, allow communications from your private computing to Google Cloud, or you do bidirectional. And depending on those strategies, you may have to use, a NAT gateway, Cloud NAT, things like Cloud Router to create your routing rules, obviously firewalls and segmentation to complete the picture. Anything else to add to that one, perhaps?
Yeah, part of what strikes me as part of that conversation is that you touched on it, but didn't explicitly call out the security implications to this, right? So a lot of the natting, a lot of that stuff is really security construct. So you got to make sure that as you're building your connectivity strategy, you do it as part of your GRC constructs. And you got to make sure that whatever connectivity you're building also follows best practices around, hey, do I have the right kind of east-west traffic? Do I have the right north-south traffic? And there's a lot of tools, both Google native as well as from partners of Google, that provide you a lot of that visibility. And understanding those can sometimes be complicated and difficult. We're here to help, but I just want to call out that you absolutely must do this under a security-first mentality and then connectivity second. Otherwise, it is very much going to be easy for you to accidentally create a environment where evildoers could take advantage of your organization. And in today's environment, that is more important than it ever has been. The amount of evildoers seems to have multiplied, and we just need to be ever vigilant against all of that. So I'll take us on to the next slide. I do want to point out that Insight does have a large number of services that we can help you out with. Everything from the economics and assessments, IT cost optimizations that Sri mentioned as part of the strategy. We do have workload alignment and IT strategy sessions. These are our offerings. These are designed to help you understand what is out there, what's in your environment, understand both the technical flows of data as well as the business requirements for those workloads. We also have services around application data and infrastructure rationalization. So what are the right tools to bring for your application? Should you boycott? Should you build something new? Should you modernize to a new type of database or not? All those things. There's also the transformation services that are associated with that, and how to migrate legacy applications to modern, how to create cloud-native platforms that are on-premises. That could be, as an example, around Anthos. It could be around VMware that's tied to the VMware cloud on Google. It could be a number of those things. The security conversation I just spoke about, and make sure that you have your security enabled, not just from the network, but for your applications themselves, having built with security contexts in place from the very beginning. If you are going to be undertaking a migration effort, we do have a migration factory. We have a team of dedicated folks that can take the strategy that you built or that we built with you and implement it for you, and allow your teams to focus more on the operational sides or on new product development, while we handle the workload of moving the migration itself. And we also do have a full-on DevOps transformation where we can help an organization as a whole or individually at a smaller team on a more tactical basis adopt the full-on DevOps model, including things like, hey, how do I consume infrastructure both on-premises in the public cloud in a cloud-native format. And that's the cultural transformation as well as the technical transformation as well. And this is all enabled across wherever you choose to run your workloads, whether it's an on-premises traditional workload, a private cloud where you're doing cloud-native patterns on-premises, whether it's a hybrid cloud where you're consuming something that lives with 1 foot in one and 1 foot in the other, or a full-on Google cloud where you're doing everything in the public cloud and you're running it all up there, all right? And hopefully some of these services are valuable to you. We'd love to help you. But we also hope that the conversation that we've had with Sri, myself, and Levi so far has given you some gold nuggets that you can take and leverage from here. But Levi, do you want to take it to what other resources we've made available for our clients?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think that the slide that you had just presented on, Juan, really did capture all of the services and actions that IT professionals really need to consider as they're adopting and migrating into cloud. I mean, everything from an economic assessment through the workload assessment, traffic mapping, dependency mapping, through that migration into security, cost optimization, and DevOps. You can't really get away with moving to cloud successfully and having an awesome experience without doing all of those. The way I think about it in terms of next steps and ways to think about it are really consider kind of 3 buckets of things that you need to tackle in partnership. And those 3 buckets are your strategy thought process, your cloud enablement, and your ongoing cost optimization. And, what's great about that is you have partners, IT organizations have partners in those buckets. So we can help you work with your cloud platform vendor, or if you're running ISV workloads, your ISV provider as well, on top of our own service offerings and consulting and professional services to wrap these up. So when I think in terms of what you need to consider on strategy, what we encourage people to think about is, are you adopting cloud with a true hybrid cloud strategy or multi-cloud strategy that's meaningful? What we see a lot is that IT organizations are not considering that. They're driving into cloud, quickly, a lot of times reactive to procurement or chasing that OpEx type of cost modeling. But with the organizations that are very meaningful and intentional in their strategy, they're putting a lot of thought into what goes where. They have solid, tangible reasons for multi-cloud or solid, tangible reasons for hybrid. And they're bringing along their business transformation as to what they're providing to their end customers and clients at the same time that they're adopting cloud. One awesome example of this is, if you're treating cloud non-strategic and just another location, and you have a storage workload, what cloud is going to mean to you is just another place to put that storage. If you're mirroring that with a true cloud strategy, along with your business transformation, that storage in cloud now becomes AI-type services. You're harnessing those additional benefits that cloud is providing. And Insight can help you work with the cloud vendors to really figure out what that is and define a better option. And we can connect you directly with Google as well for help and support in subsidizing that business transformation. The cloud enablement, considerations, we've talked about that before. It's everything from people, processes, to governance, to technical skill set. But what it really comes into is, as you adopt full cloud, hybrid cloud, or multi-cloud, you are adding so much complexity into what you have to manage as far as technical support, and implementation type skill sets. And it's going to get very challenging for you to develop, retain, and continue to hire professional skill sets within your own organization. So really figuring out, what is your model for partnerships, whether it's directly with the cloud vendor, whether you're using, Insight for migrations and ongoing services, wrapping around a strategy to that, so as you're not having to be reactive to that as challenges come up, is huge. And, the technical support around all of that is a huge consideration that you should consider, and that Insight can help you kind of tackle. And then the cost optimization. So this is one that we do alongside Google for customers and a client success motion. But that's really considerations of ongoing, continuing to look at your environment as you're moving things in to constantly and continually improve your costs and charges within cloud. So a lot of that is things like workload settings. It could be ongoing discussions about what type of developer rules and settings you implement, or it could be working with Insight to see your full environment to make intelligence decisions around reserved instances, or negotiating larger commits with cloud platform vendors like Google and pulling that all together. So I'm going to open it up to questions here in a bit, but one thing to keep in mind is this follow-up to this webcast, you're going to get a couple resources in email from us. The ebook, 5 Steps to a Successful Cloud Journey. We strongly encourage you to read through that. It's going to wrap up a lot of what we talked about today in terms of what you can do in actionable next steps. And then our one-pager on cloud capabilities and offerings. Obviously, as Insight, we're really eager to partner with you on your cloud journey and help you define that strategy as well as implement it. But again, everything that we can help you with are steps you're going to have to take to be really successful in cloud. You can find Juan, Sri, or myself on LinkedIn, or engage with us through our follow-up email. We're always happy to continue the conversation and help you along with your journey. So with that, I'll just open it up. Are there any questions or any kind of departing remarks that Juan or Sri you would like to make?
So I'm looking at the Q&A panel. There is no outstanding questions out there. So very much appreciate everybody that participated on today's call. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to working with you in the near future.
Awesome. Thank you for the time.
Thanks, everyone.